The liberal-leaning Wisconsin Supreme Court is at last hearing oral arguments in a case which will likely overturn that state's heavily gerrymandered, absurdly pro-Republican voting maps, restoring democracy. And at least one of the conservative justices is so furious that she is visibly throwing tantrums from behind the bench. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, this is great. This is phenomenal. It's not the conclusion to an ongoing story, but I feel like we're getting to the end. It's the latest development in a series of videos we've been discussing about Wisconsin. Wisconsin, as you know, like North Carolina, is effectively a purple battleground state. For every one conservative voter you can find, you will find one liberal voter as well. I mean, poll after poll after poll and research prove this. As a matter of fact, Wisconsin has one Democratic senator in the U.S. Senate and one Republican senator in the U.S. Senate. It's split right down the middle. And yet, if you look at the state's internal legislature, you wouldn't know that, because the Republican Party, going back about 10 years ago, when they briefly controlled all three branches of government, they used it in bad faith, as Republicans are wont to do, to enshrine heavily gerrymandered voting maps, which basically to this day have allowed them to basically get within a stone's throw of a supermajority, even though it's a purple state. They are 2 seats away from having a veto-proof supermajority against the Democratic governor. And yet, like most states, Wisconsin elects its Supreme Court justices. And back in April, there was an election. There was a vacancy on the court, and the liberal justice, Janet Protasiewicz, won by a landslide, in a landslide margin, over a insane Trump loyalist who wanted to help overturn the last election. Now, in response to this, the Republican legislature was freaking out because they knew that somebody would now challenge their heavily gerrymandered voting maps. And this particular judge, Justice Janet Protasiewicz, she made it very clear during the campaign that she thought the maps were rigged, which they are. And so Republicans schemed to actually try to impeach her. They were publicly questioning about impeaching her even before she heard her first case, because they are so terrified of the outcome of this particular case. But because of an intense public pressure campaign and the fact that the very experts these Republicans hired to try to justify impeaching this justice, everyone said, listen, you don't have the rationale for it, you don't have the basis for it, do not impeach her. And so at least so far, they've backed down. And now the case is being decided, the challenge to these heavily gerrymandered voting maps. And we do have some clips to play because they're hilarious, but I just want to give you a bit of a refresher here. Now, the oral arguments were first heard, the 3 hours worth of arguments, on Tuesday, so yesterday, in Madison, the capital of Wisconsin. Attorneys for 19 Democratic voters who filed suit in August directly with the Supreme Court, just days after the liberal majority took control, asked the bench to rule that the state's legislative maps are unconstitutional and to order new maps be drawn by March. Governor Tony Evers, a Democrat, and Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul, both Democrats, they joined the suit, okay? So, again, it was very, very tense, as the clips will show. I just want to remind everybody, though, again, of how absurdly purple Wisconsin is. So we have 12 contiguous Senate districts. They are currently represented by 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, We have 21 non-contiguous Senate districts, and they're currently represented by 5 Democrats and 16 Republicans. The relationship is not coincidental, okay? Just again to show you how gerrymandered this purple state is. Now, with that in mind, I want to play this clip. The person in question, besides the gentleman who is the attorney, is a conservative justice named Rebecca Bradley, who is absolutely insane. We'll talk more about her after the clips are done. I've got 3 clips I want to play for you, starting with this one here.
Good morning, and may it please the court. The Wisconsin Constitution's redistricting requirements are not optional.
Counsel?
Yes.
Counsel, where were you? Where were your clients 2 years ago? Because we've already been through this. Redistricting happens once every 10 years after the census. All of the issues that you're bringing actually could have been brought before this court 2 years ago. So why did your clients sit on their rights? We granted intervention to basically anybody who wanted to participate in the litigation. I know your law firm participated in the litigation in Johnson. Where were your clients? Why did they wait 2 years?
This justice is so mad that she interrupted the attorney in his opening remarks, which is highly unusual. She can't even control herself. She's just frothing, boiling with rage. How dare you file a lawsuit? How dare you exercise your rights, not immediately, but when you think it's convenient for you? How dare you, sir? She goes on here.
Thank
So
you
that's
for the
sort of the
summary of that argument, counsel, but I want to get back to my line of questioning, which relates to whether we should be here in the first place. Everybody knows that the reason we're here is because there was a change in the membership of the court. You would not have brought this action, right, if the newest justice had lost her election.
No, Your Honor, that's not right. I
Well,
reject
Law
the...
Forward actually announced to the media in April after the justice's election that they would be bringing this very case before the court. And wasn't that based on that justice's pronouncements about the maps being rigged?
Got one more clip to play. By the way, the justice in question is, again, Janet Protasewicz, who was sitting 2 people down from Justice Bradley to her left. This is the last clip, and again, we'll unpack all this together.
The court could take the governor's maps, but the court just can't take the
Correct.
So it's okay to usurp the legislature's, it's okay to usurp the legislature's constitutional mandate to redistrict, but it's not okay for the court to, I'm not following your argument at all. It doesn't make any
isn't
sense.
the fact that the
I'd like an
legislature-
answer to my question, Justice, first.
Well, I think it's because the legislature was a party.
Are you arguing the case?
The
So it's just so bad that she is visibly and verbally snapping at one of her peers, another justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Twitter reacted hilariously to it. They were mocking her and trolling her, as well they should. She's a terrible person who deserves to be humiliated at every opportunity. We're talking again about Rebecca Bradley. Now, Rebecca Bradley is so unhinged, and I mentioned this in a previous video, that it was back in like 2020 or 2021, I guess it was 2021, that there was a Supreme Court case in Wisconsin involving a man who got drunk and brandished a firearm against his own roommates when they came into the apartment that they all shared. And it was basically a question of Second Amendment rights. And even the other conservatives were like, listen, the Second Amendment does not afford you the right to get drunk and brandish a loaded firearm to your own roommates, right? We're not talking about intruders. We're not talking about guests whom you've asked to leave and didn't, nothing like that, but people who have an equal claim to the domicile in which you reside. You don't have a right to drunkenly brandish a firearm. She is the one dissent. This is how crazy this woman is. She believes that a person has a constitutional right to get drunk and brandish a firearm against their roommates, and that the decision to the contrary erodes a fundamental freedom. That's a direct quote. So listen, the case isn't done yet. It's entirely possible that one of the liberals, or maybe all of the liberals, will side with the conservatives and uphold Wisconsin's absurdly, indefensibly gerrymandered voting maps, but I doubt it. And I think Rebecca Bradley, who is, again, one of the conservative justices, I think her reaction to this is kind of a good thermometer. The fact that she is so unhinged, so nervous, so upset at the prospect that her party will lose its indefensible institutional advantage and have to play the game of politics on even terrain. I think that kind of gives you a clue as to how this case is likely to be determined. So I just wanted to share that with you. Obviously, we'll see what happens when it's finally a decision and a ruling is finally made. But I love this. I love how upset she is. She deserves it. She deserves every ounce of misery, which is probably torturing her wretched soul at this very moment. Rebecca Bradley is unhinged. She is, deranged. She's a radical in the worst possible way. And anything that brings her and others like her misery is good for the country. So I'm glad to see that democracy is likely to be restored in Wisconsin. And because Wisconsin's a purple battleground state, that could have sweeping implications for the 2024 election. It says something that in 2020, Donald Trump, the then sitting president, attempted to use Wisconsin to overturn President Biden's victory, because Donald Trump won Wisconsin in 2016 and Joe Biden won it in 2020. And Trump wanted to overturn the results. Rebecca Bradley actually endorsed that particular effort. Actually, a conservative justice at the time, Hagedorn, he was the one dissent. He sided with the liberal minority against Donald Trump's schemes, but Rebecca Bradley was in full-throated support of Trump's attempts to fascistically steal democracy and install himself as a dictator. So anyway, good news for democracy. The cherry on top, of course, is this terrible person's misery. Let me know what you think in the comments.